Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today in the studio, we have Ian Cron. Ian is a best-selling author, psychotherapist, pastor, Enneagram teacher, and podcast host. In his latest book, The Fix, Ian draws on his own recovery journey from drug and alcohol addiction, sharing his personal experience of finding true freedom through the 12-step program. He emphasizes that 12-step recovery is not just a strategy for guiding substance users into sobriety. It's a transformative tool for anyone seeking to move beyond self-help to a profound spiritual awakening. Now, I was sharing with Ian that I am also a friend of Bill and have had the absolute pleasure of being taken through the 12 steps, which has absolutely changed my life. So I am beyond excited to dive into this conversation today. So Ian, without any further delay, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you?
I'm wonderful, and thank you for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. Now, you were sharing with me before that you're dialing in from Nashville, Tennessee.
I am. Yes, I am. Music City.
Music City, and it is on my bucket list. I've been to the US half a dozen times, but I've never made it to Nashville, so I absolutely need to get myself there. What's it like at the moment over in the US?
Oh, are you talking about which climate are you talking about? The weather or the rest of it?
Or the political state?
Or the political state? Yes. Well, weather-wise, we are having a beautiful day in Nashville. It is. We are now into spring, and so it is just a lovely 70 and sunny. And right after this conversation with you, I'm heading out with the dogs into the woods.
Oh, how beautiful. What sort of dogs do you have?
I have two golden doodles.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm a
They
crazy
are.
dog lady over here.
Me too. I'm a crazy dog dude.
I love that. I love that. Awesome. Well, Ian, as I mentioned, I'd love to start this conversation with just a couple of nice, easy questions that allow our audience to get to know you a bit better if they don't know who you are or they haven't come across your work yet. I'm sure they will definitely deep dive after this conversation today. To start with, you've already shared where you live, Nashville, Tennessee. Can you share with us what does an average day look like and what do you do for fun?
Wow. There is no such thing as an average day. I have a portfolio life. I have sort of a lot of different hats I wear. So, as you mentioned, I'm a psychotherapist. I am an Enneagram teacher. And by the way, for those who don't know, the Enneagram is a personality typing system. And so I do a lot of work with clients, corporate clients, individual clients around work with the Enneagram. I'm an author, so I do spend quite a bit of time writing. I have just multiple hats that I wear. So no days are the same. But typically, I get up early in the morning, 5:30. I have a morning routine, spiritual routine. I get up and I have mindfulness meditation practice, followed by spiritual readings, journaling, getting my head screwed on straight for the day. I then often will go from that to a 12-step meeting, recovery meeting, to get my day going, and then into meetings and appointments and all this stuff. I meet with a trainer 5 days a week. So I do work out in the gym quite a bit. And my wife and I are very sort of food conscious and, just paying attention, attending to our lives as we should. And then we go to bed at the same time every night. We think that sleep's really, really important. So we go to bed pretty early and lather, rinse, repeat. How's that? And obviously I have a lot of travel and business clients and all that. So
Yeah,
it varies.
I love that. As you were describing all of that, I'm thinking, gosh, that sounds like the perfect day. It really does. Was a morning routine something that was important to you previous to getting into recovery?
Yes. Now I would say that it has evolved over the years as to what's in it, but having a set aside time for just centering myself and also just feeding myself, right? Like spiritually, intellectually, emotionally feeding myself properly in the morning is really, really important to me.
Yeah, fantastic. And Ian, I'd love to know, in all of that, where do you find time for fun, and what does that look like?
Well, it's interesting. Uh, I A lot of the things that sound like work to me are fun.
Yeah. I get
So
that.
going like working out with my trainer is fun. I like the
Yeah.
gym. And that's every day. I actually, when I first moved to well, my first love in life was songwriting. That's one of the reasons I'm in Nashville, right? And
Wow.
so I've done a lot of songwriting. I've done a lot of songwriting for other artists, and I that is still a source, although it's not how I make my living. It is something that brings me great joy when I do it. My wife and I are both avid, hikers and walkers, and we like to travel to places where we can take interesting walks. And I have a really good network of friends and that I see regularly. And otherwise, I mean, the line between fun and work is very blurry for me, because, for
Mm,
example, I'm an author and I read a lot. Well, I love to read. So, I mean, it's just,
yeah.
it's all kind of a part and parcel. It's not, I can't really disentangle it all.
That's the dream though, isn't it? I think so many people who are listening along would think to themselves, "Oh gosh, if I could find a vocation that I not only love that but that I have fun doing, that would be the ultimate goal." I think we spend so much of our life in the workspace that to find that sweet spot, which is something that's happened for me as well in recovery. Previous to recovery, I was working a corporate job. It was my dream job at the time, but you don't know what you don't know. And to be in a place now where, it's 7:30 in the morning for me, but that's okay. I'm happy to get up early and to jump on and record a podcast because I love it. It's exciting. I get to
Mm.
meet interesting
Hmm.
people and it sets my soul on fire. So it really is about really getting to know who you are so that you can find out what makes you feel alive, and then if you can turn that into work, then that's just an absolute bonus. So thank you for sharing. I feel like I do know you better already, which is wonderful. So Ian, I've asked you to bring in a photo today. Now, that photo is from a time in your life where you were hiding behind a smile. So you were presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the truth was your internals did not match your externals. Could you please describe for our audience who are listening and not necessarily watching right now, what am I looking at in this photo? I'm going to bring it up on the screen for those who are watching. Could you describe the photo that we're looking at and also tell me what was going on for you at that time in your life?
Sure. Well, as I recall, this photo was taken in Rome, and I
Mm.
am standing in a piazza somewhere in Rome, or maybe it was in Florence. I can't remember which it was. It was 2020, and I was kind of reaching a moment when I realized that I had sort of relapsed and entered into a relationship with some prescription medications that had now moved into an addiction. And at that time, I was really wrestling with, of what am I going to do? And then shortly after that, went to treatment.
Mm. Wow. Tell me, how long had you been sober prior to the
Yeah.
relapse?
So I first entered the rooms of recovery in 1987. And
Wow.
yeah. But I like to say that the first time around, I kind of audited the class. Um, I didn't really take it for credit. You know what I'm saying? And in fairness to myself, there's a reason for that. First of all, I was very young. I Everyone in the room was like double my age where I
Mm.
lived. I lived in a suburb of Manhattan, and um, it was you know this wasn't an era when there was treatment centers like that we have now. It was like you just went to meetings, like good luck, go to meetings. And I don't think I kind of had a great entry point.
Mm.
But I got enough from it that I didn't drink for the next, you know decades, like decades,
Wow.
right? Yeah, never touched a mood altering substance for decades. But I didn't go to meetings. I didn't work a program all those years either. Right. So I went initially for like 2 or 3 years, didn't really get it, kind of got it, but not really, but enough that I stopped drinking. Then
Mm-hmm.
Until 2020, right? Nothing, no hiccups on the journey. And then, sure enough, I ran into a season of great distress that led to uh, that misadventure, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
and now, 5 years later, or almost 5 years later, I decided that I wanted to write a book about what it was like to go through the steps the second time. And what I really wanted to do was write a book, not about my story, because although my story's in the book a little bit, it's really an exploration of the steps as a design for living that anyone could benefit from, right? Because I kept
Mm.
going to meetings, and one of the things you didn't mention, you mentioned I'm a pastor. I'm an Episcopal priest or an Anglican priest, depending on where you're from. And I I was like, how do we get this out of church basements and out to everybody? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like these 12-step meetings that often meet in those basements, right? Um, how do we democratize these steps and have people realize that they too could derive the same benefits from working them, even if they aren't a self-identified alcoholic or addict in the
Mm.
traditional sense of the word, right?
Mm. Mm.
Um, and that was the genesis of this new phase of my life.
Amazing. I'm smiling as you're talking because it is a conversation that I have had many, many times with my normie friends, my friends who don't identify as having any addictions of any sort, but they've seen how drastically my life has changed in the last 5 years. And I often credit that to the 12 steps and the realizations, the spiritual awakening that I've had, but also how I've just learned how to do life differently now. I've
Yeah.
had that shift in mindset, and I see the world very differently now, which means I behave and act in the world differently. And it's changed my life for the better. And they will often say, "Oh, I wish I could do a 12-step program. I wish I could do these steps. They sound amazing." And I always say it's the most incredible personal development program you will ever encounter in your life. So I completely agree with that. And I can't wait to dive into more around the steps. Before we go there, I'd love to know, you mentioned that you came into recovery in 1987 and that you were quite young. What was the precursor to that decision? Because normally people have to be pretty, busted up before they walk into one of those rooms. We don't go
Yeah.
in skipping and dancing. So what did that look like for you?
Well, I mean, I grew up in an alcoholic home, right? And
Mm.
in fact, borrowing a phrase from a friend of mine, I oftentimes say, I grew up in an alcoholic dynasty. My father was an alcoholic, sadly died from alcoholism at
Mm.
60. I
Wow.
have a sibling in recovery. I have a son in recovery. These are people
Wow.
who, I mean, I have my permission to say this. I'm not outing anybody without their permission. Um, I had two aunts who died from alcoholism. I mean, it just runs rampant in my family. And, as you can imagine, I, from an early age, had a fascination with mood altering substances. It was what everyone was doing in the world around me. What I learned from people in my family growing up, I think, was that that the only solution to internal problems um, is something external, right?
Mm.
Like alcohol or drugs or smoking or whatever, like I just learned, if you're feeling distress, if something's awry inside, then you have to put it out with something external to you, right? And rather than understanding your inner world as rather than understanding that happiness or well-being is an inside job, not I and I wasn't given those tools either, right, to know how to deal. So um, high school, college, I won't bore you with all the details, but I was a guy that was um, I was a smart but popular but a party guy, in those years. And by the time I was 27, newly married, I had come to the end of my run, and I went to a therapist, and this therapist I did not know it was a guy in recovery. And he looked at me, and he could just tell after about 45 minutes of talking to me that I was an alcoholic. And he's like, I can't meet with you anymore until you agree to stop drinking. You have to get to a program. Like, you're in trouble. And like Anne Lamott, I quote her in The Fix. I say, like, reasoning with an alcoholic is like trying to blow out a light bulb. It's like, I just would have none of it, right? I was stormed out. I am not an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I had my final little bender, if you will, around New Year's Eve in Manhattan. And which led me back to his office at the strong encouragement of my wife and several other people. And he took me to my first 12-step meeting.
Wow. Do you remember that day? Do you remember the meeting?
Vaguely.
I'm a bit the same,
it's a
actually.
Minute ago. And,
a lot more. I was born in 1987, so definitely longer for you.
Yes.
But I still, I remember I'd get to these points. I probably went to half a dozen meetings before I actually came into recovery in 2020, sort of the decade leading up to that. And what would happen is I would get to a point where I had sufficiently blown up my life enough to reach out to my dad, who is also a member and has been around for 15 years. And he would take me to a meeting with loving kindness, no judgment, and he would just let me sit and listen. But the problem I found, Ian, at the time was I was still so consumed with self. I was so focused on what everyone was going to be thinking of me. Oh, I don't want to be seen here. All the crazy thoughts that go through our heads when we're self-obsessed and all the like. And so I didn't hear anything. It was almost like I had cotton wool in my ears for those meetings. I didn't hear anything about a solution, the steps, a God of my understanding, like none of it landed. And so I would walk back out again and I would drink within 24 hours. So it's really interesting. I often see time and time again that it takes what it takes, and you truly have to be ready to receive the message for it to land.
Yeah.
That was my experience.
I was with my son the other day in Los Angeles about 2 days ago, and we were driving around in the back of a Waymo driverless taxi in downtown.
I've heard about these.
Yes. It's the first time I've ever been in one. And we had this beautiful conversation, and it turned into an amends conversation that was quite touching, quite moving, about something. And it wasn't an amends conversation, just meaning I was expressing some regret about something that had happened in our relationship, and I was making an amends for it. And I said to him, I said, Aiden, I think what I'm feeling right now is I need to make an amends to you for something. And he goes, go on. He's in the program, right? So he knows where this is going. And meanwhile, this car is being driven by nobody. Okay. So there's like 2 empty seats in the front, and there's just the wheel is just turning, and I'm in the back with him. And I keep looking to see if the driver's listening to this very private, tender conversation, but there's no driver. And so I said, well, I talked to him about my regrets about something, and he said, well, Dad, I just want you to know I forgive you for that. And then we got to talking about his journey and of sobriety, and he said something so beautiful, and I've heard it before, but coming from my son, it landed particularly in a beautiful way. He just said, Dad, I'm right on time. I could not have gotten to where I am today other than via the journey I went on. I am right on time. And I thought, that is so good, and I feel like that too in my own life. I'm right on time.
How beautiful.
We get there when we get there.
That's exactly right. And thank goodness we have. All right. You've mentioned, Ian, that you credit the 12 steps as having saved your life and restored your life, which I think is a really interesting choice of words. What was it about that process that created this shift in your entire life?
Yeah. Well, as you know, the stated purpose of the 12 steps, right, isn't to get people to stop drinking or taking drugs or overeating or workaholism or whatever, or porn or sex or codependency. It is not the stated purpose, right? The stated
Mm,
purpose of the steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening of
mm,
sufficient force that it renders unnecessary your need for an outside solution to your internal problems,
mm,
right? Just renders it unnecessary, right? Because you've had a spiritual awakening, right? That now has dethroned, if you will, the substance
mm,
and yourself, and puts yourself into right order, you know.
mm,
Um, and the way for me that I break it down is, I like when I look at the steps, the first 3 steps to me are about mending and deepening your relationship with your higher power, God, as I
mm,
choose to call my higher power. 4 through 7, mending and deepening your relationship with yourself.
mm,
And then 8 and 9 is about mending and deepening your relationships with others. And then 10 through 12 is really just about how do I cultivate a lifestyle that supports growth and health in each of those 3 domains of my life moving forward, right? Like, how
mm,
do I just keep growing in my relationship with God, self, and others, right?
mm,
And how do I protect those relationships? How do I cultivate them? How do I nurture them? And so in that way, by walking through the steps, what I discovered was this healing of broken relationships, right? The healing of broken relationships that then rendered my relationship with substances unnecessary. You see
mhm,
that it's all about relationships, right? It just rendered my relationship with outside substances unnecessary because the broken relationships that I was drinking or drugging to medicate, right? It's like, no need for that now.
mm,
So
mm,
that's how and what I would say, maybe to be more precise with language, is the steps probably didn't restore or, save or restore my life. My higher power did that. The steps were
mm,
the vehicle by which it happened.
mm, mm. It's beautiful. I often think about, particularly for me, 6 and 7 was where a lot of the change occurred for me because I started
Mm.
learning how to do life differently. I often think about the way that I chose to move through life for the first 30 years of my life was a direct result to the experiences that I had gone through as a child, particularly, and the maladaptive coping mechanisms that I had adopted to figure out a way to move through life successfully. So things like manipulation, things like dishonesty, they were a daily
Yes.
occurrence. And yet they were so embedded in me, I didn't even know I was doing it. And that process of getting it out on paper and really being honest and observing my behaviors and then having somebody there to hear my stuff and then to guide me in the contrary action was so profound. I had the absolute blessing of doing that yesterday with a sponsee. And every single time I have the pleasure of doing, the 5th step, which then leads into 6
Mm.
and 7, I just think to myself, my God, this changes lives. It's truly powerful. But Ian, I'd love to go back to 1, 2, 3 for a moment because I was very blessed that when I came into recovery, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just that I had the gift of desperation or I was so battered and bruised that there was no other option. But I had absolutely no resistance when it was explained to me that it was a spiritual program and that I would be asked to develop a relationship with a higher power or a God of my understanding. I just went, yep, okay, show me how it's done. Like, let's go. However, I don't find that to be the common story. I find that the majority of the women that I work with or that I meet in the program do have a resistance for one reason or another. I'm sure that you probably experience the same over in the US. May I ask, what would your guidance or advice be around that for people who really struggle with the God word or even the idea of connecting to something greater than themselves?
Yeah, I address this in the book, right? Like, because I think it's a really important question, right? I'm very gentle with people,
Mm,
but I try to be also very uh, compassionately clear too, right? Like, I do remind them that they do presently have a higher power. It's called alcohol
mm,
or it's called drugs. or it's called codependency. All right, like they already have been serving and kneeling at the altar of a higher power for quite some time. They have done what that higher power has told them to do, right? And they have done it without even against their best interests, right? So I just remind them that this is to have a higher power is not something they're unfamiliar with, right? The question is it the right higher power? And so I just invite them to begin to consider that, because it's like I'm gonna live and die. I'm gonna plant my flag on the ground of my autonomy, and I'm like, you haven't been autonomous for years. What are you talking about? Like, you haven't been independent for years, right? So I don't know why you're suddenly getting all morally superior on that, right? So it's kind of insane, which is, of course, it is. So so humor and just also I try to create a space for people where I'm like, look, if you'll just be honest and open and willing, and could you just give me a thimbleful of willingness, just a thimble of willingness? And I said, if you to just maybe begin your day even by putting your feet on the floor and saying, I don't know if you're out there, but I'm willing to believe it. Help me. I said, what if we just started there? Just a thimble of willingness, and then see what comes back. Let's just see what comes back, right? And I find that over time, I have to say, I've never had somebody drop out on me over the issue of God or a higher power. Usually, I do believe that there is a force in the universe of goodness and love and kindness and mercy and grace and transformation. And all it takes from us is just a little glance in that direction of that power and saying, I'm broken and I'm willing. Even it's funny in the Bible, there's this one story about where this guy says to Jesus, he says, I believe, but help my unbelief, and it's like, what a great statement. Right. It's like, I believe, help my unbelief. And if you can just come with that kind of heart that just says, save me, then suddenly what you discover is that this power, this love in the universe will rush to your aid. Will rush to your aid if you open your heart to it. Even just a teeny little bit. And then over time, what happens as you do is the crack in the door just opens ever so slowly, more and more and more and more and more, until one day you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got a higher power. Like, I'm connected to something. I don't know what to call it, or I do know what to call it, whichever, doesn't really matter. All I know is that love now has me.
That's so beautiful. I love that, Ian. That was absolutely my experience, the progressive nature of forming a relationship with my higher power. I remember there's a meeting here in Melbourne on a Sunday morning, and it's all around the spiritual experience. And I remember sitting there in my second year of sobriety, internally judging myself because I felt like I hadn't got it yet, like I wasn't doing recovery right, because I would hear all of these older sober members talk about this profound relationship they had and how their higher power moved in their life. And I thought to myself, I'm just pretending, because I was taking the action. I was praying and trying to cultivate that connection. But the word trying is exactly right. It was almost like I was forcing it because this perfectionism within me wanted to get it right. And then something clicked at about 18 months. And I woke up one day and I felt the presence. And I just thought to myself, there it is. There it is.
You had a
and
felt experience.
That's right.
A felt experience, yes.
It's beautiful. So for anyone listening along who maybe has that experience, I would just encourage you to keep taking the action, to try not to overthink, try not to force. And over time, it does happen. I've seen it happen time and time again.
I've been working with a client, and I love this person. And he is trying to discern his life's purpose. And I said to him, now, this is going to get a little woo-woo, is what I said to him. I said, look, because actually, you actually do know your life purpose. You just haven't slowed down long enough to hear it. Like you haven't, you're just, and actually, I would tell you that your soul is trying to tell you what it is, but you have not been able to slow down and open yourself enough. And it's just that willingness. Would you just be willing to do a few things for me? That might, because if we clear the ground, if we clear the space enough, right, it might fall into your hands without you really having to try that hard. It might just fall into your hands.
Ian, can I ask, what were some of the suggestions that you made around being able to create more space?
Oh, okay. So a couple of things. One was I asked him very simply. I said, "Now this is not a person in recovery. So this is just a client that doesn't he. This client is a workaholic, but not a alcoholic or drug addict, which can be as devastating, by the way.
Absolutely.
Separate topic. However, I said, look, I need 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night. That's where we're going to start. And 20 minutes in the morning, you're going to spend 3 minutes in mindfulness meditation to start. And I'm going through teaching him how to do that. And this is just to start, right? So I don't want to go too hard on him. Then I said, I want you to spend 10 minutes reading. And I've given him some assigned readings. Then I said, I want you to spend 5 minutes journaling, responding. And I've given him some journal prompts that he can use. And then I want you to spend 2 minutes praying. And I said, now look, I don't care who you pray to. I don't care if you pray to your soul. I don't care if you pray to the great, the great spirit beyond the uncaused cause of the universe. It doesn't really matter to me. Great spirit. All I want you to do is let this make contact with this part of you in the world, the universe, that has your purpose, and to establish a line of communication, if you will, so that when the time is right, this sense of purpose will come to you. Yeah, it's just going to become a part of the conversation that will emerge as we go.
That's exactly my experience. The more I stopped trying to force and find the answer, the more I got out of my own way, the answers are then revealed. It's almost like you step into the flow of life where you were meant to be before you got distracted or took a wrong turn. And the way I know that, the felt experience of that for me is ease. It's contentment. I don't have this constant resistance on a day-to-day basis. I don't feel like I'm pushing up against anything. Life just feels like it's in flow, and it's a beautiful place to be. So, Ian, you're the Enneagram guy, and I mentioned before that I know very little about the Enneagram. I believe there's some numbers. It's a personality testing type model. Could you explain for our audience if you think there's any direct correlation between somebody's Enneagram number and their propensity for addiction?
Yeah, great question. So for those listening, the Enneagram is a personality typing system, and it teaches that there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood as a way to cope, to feel safe, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the world of relationships in which we now find ourselves, right? And it's a really beautiful, uncannily accurate system. And it really just helps people see that what's best about them is what's worst about them, and what's worst about them is what's best about them. And it also reveals to them the both the challenges and the strengths that each of these types has, right? And what it does is it gives them a an ability to understand why they act, think, and feel the way they do on a predictable and habitual basis, right? And so that they can monitor and try to be the best expression of themselves, right? Now, the thing about personality is it's like maybe one of the most hotly contested debates in psychology, right? So like, where does it come from? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it this? What accounts for people's personalities, for how they show up in life? And what I would say is that I oftentimes hear people say, oh, so-and-so's got an addictive personality. And you've heard that before, right? Oh, I've got an addictive
Oh, of
personality. And I'm
course.
like, actually, that doesn't exist. We have no science that would suggest that there is an addictive personality type, right? Like, doesn't exist. When I go to the rooms of recovery, I see all 9 Enneagram types well represented in the room. You know what I mean? I see all the types. Like I always say that, addictions are like equal opportunity enslavers. They do not favor a particular personality, right? Now,
No.
granted, some personalities have more issues around impulse control, maybe less conscientious, but each type, is, um, has a proclivity toward addiction, because I just think it's part of the human condition. Like, we are wired for addictions. Like, our brains and everything else are wired for addiction. Now, we may not become an alcoholic or substance use addict, but there are things like workaholism or relationships, or the list of potential addictions is long, really long, and all of them diminish us. Yeah.
I just had this thought come to mind, and it's interesting. I thought to myself, it's interesting how, because to me, often, when we think about addiction broadly, it's a desire to self-soothe, to escape the discomfort that we're feeling that we don't want to feel. And it's interesting, isn't it, that that's something that we learn how to do as babies. A baby cries, they might be given a pacifier, and so they're self-soothing, and then it's almost that, because we don't learn how to do that internally. Like you mentioned it earlier on the show, it's that external solution to the internal void. It's no wonder that as adults, we continue to look outside of ourselves to fill the God-shaped hole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And our brains then cooperate. Trust me, the reward centers, the way that the brain is set up, it is very vulnerable to addiction. The human brain is very vulnerable to addiction. So it's whenever I meet somebody who's an addict, I'm never surprised, and I think my posture is always, I try anyway, to have this very compassionate, like I remember when I was in treatment, I remember someone saying to me, a therapist saying to me something like, Ian, I'm really glad you found, you know, um, alcohol, And I was like, what? He's like, well, you've been through a lot of trauma in your life, and it kind of held you together for a while. You know what I mean? And thankfully it didn't kill you. And here you are. And now we get to work on what's really the problem. We get to work, because, like, isn't it interesting, Ash? Like, people always are saying things like, oh, so-and-so has a drinking problem, or so-and-so has a drug problem. And I'm like, that's true. But actually what you should say is so-and-so has a drinking solution, or so-and-so has a drug solution. They don't have a drug problem. That's not the problem. The drinking and the drugs are not the problem. They are the solutions to the problem. Now, they are misguided solutions, but in the mind of the person who's using them, it is the solution, right? And so our job is to turn our attention to the problem that these misguided solutions are trying to treat, so that the need for those solutions is no longer necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. That ties really beautifully into the next question I had for you, Ian, which is around this idea of being dry. And what you described to me about your experience coming in the late 80s and abstaining from alcohol, but not doing the steps. I would classify that as being a dry drunk. Do you use that phrase where you are, and what does that mean to you? And what would be your encouragement to somebody who's perhaps come into recovery but is like, I'm not going to drink, but I ain't doing that stuff over there. I'm not doing the stuff on the wall. I'm just going to stay in my lane and not drink.
Yeah. Well, so I think I'm, dare I say, I don't want to say I'm an anomaly, but here's the deal. Yes, I went to, I was in the rooms for a couple of years and then stopped and then was years out there without a program really. But however, in those years, I did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of work. I had a rich spiritual life in lots of ways. And so I didn't have a lot of the character. I don't think a lot of the symptoms that you see of a dry drunk, which is irritability, restlessness, discontent. Now you're just great. Now you used to be a jerk. You used to be a jerk with a drinking problem. Now you're just a jerk. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
and in some ways you were easier to handle when you were drinking. I mean, it's like, gosh. So I think I'd have to really reflect more on it, but I don't really, looking back, I can't say to you, oh, I was a dry drunk. Now I do know because there were so many other things going on that were positive in my life that may have helped me avoid some of those pitfalls. And not everybody gets to do those things, right? And what I would say is that, listen, once you take away the source of your solution, right? Drinking, drugs, and you're left with the problem that those drugs and drinking were trying to solve. It's a very uncomfortable place. Now you're having to live with all of the internal chatter and noise of your life, and without a spiritual foothold, you're really kind of a mess. You're going to be kind of a mess. And so I would just strongly encourage whoever's listening and thinks, okay, I'm just going to go without drinking. Well, okay, great, but you're going to be hanging on by your eyelids. Like you're just going to be like fingers just, holding on. You will not experience that kind of spiritual freedom, that kind of ease that you're talking about. This kind of like settling into grace, this kind of falling into a place of trust where you're, because as long as you're not drinking, you're still in charge, and that's going to be a mess.
Yeah,
and,
I think.
and if you're anything like me, when you're in charge, you will bang guardrail to guardrail through your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think to myself, you can be sober and miserable, or you can be sober and happy. And I would prefer the latter. So I'm going to do what I need to do to ensure that to be the case. Yes. Ian, your book, The Fix, is such a powerful message, and it's going to help so many people. I love that you're making this content accessible to a broader audience. Can I ask, did you have any trepidation releasing this work, any fear, knowing that there would be a cohort who are very entrenched in the traditions who would say you shouldn't be talking about this stuff publicly? Was that ever a thought that came through your mind, and how have you handled that?
Yeah, well, yes, it was. And because I have a sponsor, and my sponsor is a very well-known guy in the American speaker circuit of and like really well known. Like when there's an international conference of stadium sized international conference, he's on the stage, he's a plenary speaker. And so I went to him and I said, hey man, am I going to be violating any traditions if I write a book about this? Now, of course, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be, because so many books have been written that are much beloved in the world of recovery about recovery, right? So that really wasn't the problem. I had this book read by so many people that I trusted and knew had decades and decades of time in the rooms, and wanted, I had them read it. I had them scrub it with me to make sure I hadn't said anything that misrepresented our tradition. And of course, it's interesting, in the book, I never say anywhere in the book that I'm a member of a specific 12-step community. In fact, in this interview, I have not once mentioned the name of my 12-step community, because I know that that's the kind of thing I'm not supposed to do. Right. Like, so I'm really confident, nor have I heard from anybody out there yet that, oh my gosh, you broke anonymity, you did this. Like, nope, no, actually I didn't. I told my story, and that's certainly within my right to do. I haven't brought my 12-step community's name into the equation here. And I also am, the book isn't really written, it's really written for a broad audience. It's not, it's not written to other alcoholics or drug, it's written for everybody. Right. So it's like, I'm not, speaking to a specific audience of people. So no, I don't have any concerns about that at all.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. It's something that I have grappled with, having my own podcast and having many, many people with recovery stories come on and share their stories. And for me, I'm really passionate about sharing these stories because I qualified for the rooms at 18, but I didn't know they existed. And so I think the more that we can have these conversations and share the positive impacts that recovery can have on your life, the more people that can be helped and saved as a result of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like over here in the States, I mean, certainly my books sell in Australia, I'm sure, but here in the States, as an author, I've sold a lot of books, and so I am very careful on podcasts and television interviews and places like that. I'm very, very careful to, when people say, do you want to talk about, people say to me, well, so you're in AA. I go, well, actually I'm in a 12-step program that is, and I'm very careful about, things, and making sure that I don't step over boundaries. So yeah, it's important.
I think it's important too. Yeah, fantastic. I really appreciate it. Ian, I have absolutely loved this conversation today, and I'm so grateful for the work that you do where you are and the infiltration that it has all around the world. I do have one final question that I would love to ask you, and it's a question that I ask all of our guests here on Behind the Smile. And that question is, what are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live your life today happy, authentic, and free?
Oh, no, that is a very unfair question to ask. 3 non-negotiables on the spot. You're going to ask me those? Now, listen, I'm going to answer your question, but in an hour from now, I'm going to get off of this call and go, I should have said that.
Oh. So I can add them to the show notes. Don't worry.
Oh my gosh. 3 non-negotiables, huh? Whew. Well, I mean, are you talking like, when you say 3 non-negotiables, are you talking about 3 non-negotiable behaviors or things that I do, or
so
habits that I have? Or
for me, it would be meditation, movement, and probably therapy.
Got it. Yeah. Well, I guess the 3 for me would be attend to my body, meaning my trainer, my diet, just enjoying my body, making sure that that it feels well attended to, that I'm attuned to what it needs, and that I do things for it that, even though I don't feel like doing them for it some days, I do them anyway. Right. So that's one non-negotiable, and that includes things, by the way, like 8 hours of sleep a night. That includes, all kinds of things. I'd say the second thing is, attend to my relationship with God, which is what I call my higher power. And that includes meditation, spiritual reading, deepening my intellectual life, reading other great spiritual masters, people who've gone before me that have, or are contemporaries who are writing things that I feel are really important. So I'm constantly like, okay, I have to have a steady stream of spiritual and material about what does it mean to be a human, and to become a good human, right? Like to be
Mm.
really good at human. And then, you know, I think the third thing is, you know, to try to be of maximum service to others by utilizing the unique set of gifts that I have, and by fulfilling the purpose that I, you know, that for which I think I was sent here to do, you know, like, and if I do those things that we're talking about, and I could add things like go to meetings and do this, I could add all kinds of stuff here, right? But just to do all the things I can do that would help me to be a more whole and loving presence in the world. And that, you know, that to me is kind of, you know, kind of everything.
It's a beautiful purpose. Imagine if every single one of us on this earth had that intention on a daily basis. The world would be a really
Some
special
days I got
place.
it stronger than other days, but I try to.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. Spiritual fitness waxes and wanes. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, or progress, not perfection.
That's it. That's exactly right. That's what the name of the meeting is on the Sunday. I love that. Ian, I have absolutely loved this conversation with you here today, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. If they would like to track you down, find your books, where should they go?
Yeah, so the name of my new book is The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. That can be gotten at Amazon, any booksellers, but you know, go into Barnes and Noble, wherever you get books, right? You can find it. My website is ianmorgancron.com. And there's all kinds of stuff there about the Enneagram. And there's an assessment on my website you can take to learn what your Enneagram type is, and learn more about it. And on socials, I'm at Ian Morgan Cron across all the channels.
Fantastic. I'll make sure I pop all of that information in the episode show notes. Ian, we say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one need suffer in silence. So thank you so much for your service and your time here today.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much, Ash.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by hitting the follow button and leaving a rating and review. Each rating and review helps this podcast become more discoverable so more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll be back next week. Until then.